We're starting with the breaking news we ended last hour with. A New York appeals court has thrown out a massive civil fraud penalty against President Trump, a total that exceeded $500 million. They're calling that penalty excessive.
Happening now in New York, an appeals court gives President Trump a win, tossing out his massive civil fraud penalty that could have cost Mr. Trump $500 million or even more.
President Trump just earned a stunning victory in the New York appeals court system, where they ruled that the excessive fine, which was originally over $400 million in the Letitia James inflation and deflation of assets case, was actually cruel and unusual punishment. And now that fine, that has since ballooned due to interest and penalties to over $500 million, has been wiped away. The president is claiming it as a total victory. However, that's not quite true either. And this is what we're going to talk about today. We are going to break down the decision from the appeals court. It's well over 300 pages. You have multiple judges that agree that the fine is excessive, but they disagree on exactly why. And we're going to talk about the potential for Letitia James to appeal, because even though this was decided by the New York Supreme Court, the New York Supreme Court is not actually the Supreme Court in the state of New York. The highest court in this state is actually called the New York Court of Appeals. So likely they will make the final decision not just on the fine and the Eighth Amendment issue, but they will also make a decision on the merits of the case, which, by the way, this court actually ruled against the evil orange man on. So we're going to break this down. We're going to talk about this. But before we do, I want to thank everybody who pays an excessive fine to me over at actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
President Trump sounding off on that decision in a two-part social media post, saying in part, "Total victory in the fake New York State Attorney General Letitia James case. I greatly respect," the president says, "the fact that the court had the courage to throw out this unlawful and disgraceful decision that was hurting business all throughout New York State."
So look, President Trump is going to President Trump. So that statement is 100% on brand. It was posted shortly after the announcement that this fine was tossed out on Eighth Amendment grounds. And of course, he was going to declare it a perfect victory or a total victory based on the fraudulent nature of this case. However, this particular holding actually only pertains to the fine and the Eighth Amendment issue. And when you actually look at the ruling itself, what you find out is that this is a partial victory for the president, because in reality, they actually maintain the legitimacy of the conviction. His sons are still banned from operating a business in the state of New York for a couple of years, and they still have the penalties that are non-monetary, like the outside monitor that needs to review all of the Trump organization's transactions. Now, of course, the reason why the appeals court ended up ruling in this way,
the judges were bitterly divided on this one. A handful of them suggesting the whole thing should get tossed, others saying it should hold, but in agreement that ultimately the $500 million plus was too much money for someone to be paying. One of them alleging it was a violation of the Eighth Amendment and the prohibition on excessive fines,
is due to the fact that the entirety of the fine that President Trump was assessed was punitive. It was a punishment. Thus, it fell under the purview of the Eighth Amendment. And the reason why this originally $400+ million fine that ballooned due to interest and penalties to over $500 million at the time that the court handed down this ruling was viewed that way is because, if you guys will recall, there were no actual victims in this particular case. The banks that made the deal with Trump, that gave him the loans, were paid back. They were satisfied with the transaction, and they actually stated that they would be happy to do business with him in the future. And if you guys will recall, this was actually brought up in the appeals hearing that we talked about on this channel previous, where the judges were incredibly skeptical of Letitia James' application of law and why this case is brought in the first place.
May it please the court, Judith Vale for the New York Attorney General's office. All of the defendants repeatedly violated...
Ms. Vale, can you identify any previous case in which the Attorney General sued under Executive Law 6312 to upset a private business transaction that was between equally sophisticated partners, where the supposed victim had the ability and legal obligation to discover the allegedly misrepresented matters by conducting its own due diligence, where the supposed wrongdoer advised the supposed victim through written disclaimers to conduct its own due diligence and to draw its own conclusions, where the alleged misrepresentation almost entirely concerned inherently subjective valuations of properties and businesses.
Yes.
And where the victim never complained about any fraud in the transactional losses from it. Because I've gone through the cases which you've cited, and all of them always involved the consumer protection aspect. It involved protection of the market.
Several responses.
And I want to add to his question, and little to no impact on the public market.
So there's a couple of things about that line of questioning that I think are absolutely crucial for you guys to understand so you can get on board with this current ruling. First and foremost, this was a transaction between two equally sophisticated parties, i.e. the Trump organization is a functioning business with a lot of money and a lot of capital, and the financial institutions are some of the biggest ones in the world. So obviously this was not a situation where a law that is typically applied between a regular ordinary consumer and a financial institution should be applied, or at least that was the question that was being presented by the court, even though the holding did not reflect that. And what they mean by that is that while the Trump organization definitely gave their own positive valuation of their assets, which by the way did include some sketchy things like overstating the size of the penthouse in a certain building, not stating exactly which units were rent controlled versus not rent controlled in some of Trump's buildings, this all came with the disclosure that the financial institutions were supposed to do their own valuations. They did their own valuations, and this is typically how business at this level works. This is why Mr. Beautiful, the guy from Shark Tank, was going all over the media post this adjudication, talking about what a disaster it is because he understands the way the game is played at this particular level. Now, of course, there is irony in the fact that Letitia James, on a much smaller scale, was discovered to be lying on her own personal real estate documents for similar reasons in order to lower the interest rate she got for purchasing a Virginia property, which she stated, by the way, under penalty of perjury, would be her primary residence when that was clearly not the case. And of course, there's the issue of a building that she owns where she says that there's 4 units in it when there's actually 5 according to other documentation. And this, of course, made her eligible for an individual loan rather than the much more expensive commercial loan that you have to get when your building has more than 5 units in it. Now, of course, there was also the mortgage that she ended up getting with her father, where they claimed to be a married couple on said mortgage. However, that one were far past the statute of limitations, but it's just funny that Letitia James can do all of these things throughout her life to advantage herself in similar situations when it comes to real estate, but of course, she decided to go after the evil orange man for it. And honestly, it's not surprising because this was never about actually getting the evil orange man on anything legitimate. Remember, we showed you the clip from August during her campaign for the first time of Attorney General, where she said that she was going to look into his businesses specifically to find something to sue him into bankruptcy.
I've taken on powerful interests like developers. I've taken on legislators. I've taken on landlords. I've taken on powerful interest in the city of New York because I believe in a good fight. And right now, what we need is someone who understands that you should not be afraid, not be fearful of Donald Trump. We should take him down. We should sue him all the way to bankruptcy. We should investigate his business interests. We should investigate his business holdings. We should investigate whether or not why he was once in debt and now in a position to purchase all of this property. We can do that because I've been trained to do that, and I will do that at the same time knowing the Office of Attorney General and its powers and its responsibilities and its duties. My name is Letitia James, and I plan on being the next Attorney General of the state of New York. God bless you and thank you.
That clip is from Letitia James' first Democratic primary run as the Attorney General, which, by the way, she ultimately ended up winning. And right there, she is promising to weaponize the Attorney General's office to go after the evil orange man in order to sue him into bankruptcy. And of course, that's exactly what she tried to do. Remember, Letitia James's office actively worked to deny Trump's right to even appeal this case by trying to force him to fork over all $400+ million before he even had the chance to appeal, because you had to put the fine down as a bond, and the excessive fine was obviously a lot even for a billionaire to have in liquid cash. And essentially she gave him a 30-day deadline in order to do so before her office would start seizing his properties. And then of course the office was going to sell those properties, which of course if Trump ultimately ended up winning on appeal, he was never going to be able to get back. So part of Letitia James' plan wasn't necessarily to go after the evil orange man with the legitimate case, it was to get him with a high enough judgment so she could see some of his properties, damage him permanently forever, and essentially let the process be the punishment against the evil orange man. And she was also gloating on Twitter each and every day about the added interest to the penalty because she really wanted to bankrupt President Trump as she promised the voters during that Democratic primary. So yeah, this absurd, obscene fine being tossed at this level is absolutely disastrous for Letitia James, who again has a much more simple, much more legitimate case against her for her real estate fraud, in that she signed and notarized a letter that gave somebody else power of attorney that stated unequivocally that she was going to make that Virginia property her primary residence in order to get a better rate on the loan, which of course was her defrauding the financial institution in order to get better terms on a loan. Clean cut, not complicated, doesn't involve two sophisticated parties or anything of the sort. The New York Attorney General, weeks before she pursued this evil orange man case, was committing a very similar document related crime, and she probably will go down for it. And even her little victory now rings hollow because that big money amount that she's been celebrating for well over a year looks like it's also kaput. Now, Letitia James, I believe, has already filed for an appeal to the New York Court of Appeals, which, as we talked about earlier on in this video, is what you would think of when you think of a Supreme Court. Our New York system's a little bit weird, and they will ultimately render the final decision not just on the 8th Amendment issue, but of course on the issue of guilt or innocence based on the case that was presented. And as we've seen by this panel, even though they have their disagreements at this lower court level, it seems like the courts are very worried about this, especially when it obviously sets a negative precedent against businesses that are unrelated to Trump, and they know, at least in the back of their minds, that this is clearly and obviously politically motivated. Again, Letitia James stated so explicitly while she was campaigning for office. So yeah, I don't think this fine is long for this world. Remember, when we talk about constitutional issues, those are easy things to get in the federal court system, and there's no way, if this gets kicked all the way up to the Supreme Court, that the Supreme Court justices aren't going to rule, in my opinion, that these are not excessive fines. Again, quite literally, Letitia James is bragging about how much money these fines are, how unprecedented this actually is, and considering all of the penalty against the evil orange man are these fines, none of it is to pay the victims back for losses, because guess what? The victims don't exist and there were no losses. This is a disaster for Attorney General James's reputation. And when you couple that with the potential slam dunk case that the Trump DOJ has against her for her mortgage fraud, it looks like she is not long for public office, which is hilarious because remember, Letitia James also put together a hatchet job report against then Governor Andrew Cuomo in order to force him out of office because she has ultimate aspirations to become the governor of New York, and that hopefully will never happen. Now, with all that being said, I want to know what you guys think about these developments down in the comments below. I want to know what you guys think about this not being a total victory for the evil orange man, and in fact, very much being a partial victory, and if you think that he should fight on those grounds at the appellate level to get the whole case overturned, or should he just be worried about the fine? I know for a lot of us personally, that big dollar amount, big money, that's the thing we would be most concerned with, but I think this whole case needs to be defeated at the appellate level because in reality, Letitia James made her intentions clear. She weaponized this office in the state of New York, and this case is an embarrassment, and considering we are a finance state, considering we have a lot of real estate business that is done in this state, you can't allow this precedent to be on the books, and tossing it out would actually be good for everyone in the state of New York because, of course, it would allow business transactions to operate normally as they would in 49 other states, rather than having this hanging over your head that anytime a prosecutor like Letitia James has a personal vendetta against you, she can seek you out and destroy you. Again, all your thoughts about everything down in the comments below. As per usual, if you like this video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on my social medias, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about Letitia James getting slapped across the face by the courts. Till next time.